Well, I think a lot of people have been looking forward to tonight because they are confused. Is the economy heading for good times or tough times? The bottom line is ready with some answers. Patty Croft is a former senior bank executive. Jim Stanford is an economist with Unifor. Still can't figure that one out, the Unifor. It doesn't roll off the tongue like CAW.
Give it some time.
I will. Preet Banerjee is a freelance broadcast journalist specializing in financial matters. And Amanda Lang is our senior business correspondent. Their thoughts in a moment, but first, some basics. Remember all those housing bubble stories just a few months ago? Gosh, even we told some of them.
We're overvalued by about 10 to 15%.
Bubble is absolutely the apt description of what's happening.
I think we're definitely in bubble territory.
And certainly evidence of overheated markets.
Well, guess what? Even in the supposedly bloated Vancouver and Toronto markets, sales are up and prices remain strong.
And here's your balcony.
Condos still seem vulnerable, but, and it's a big but, in the major markets, they're still building them by the dozens. Interest rates are a driver, and they remain a bargain, starting with the Bank of Canada rate still seemingly frozen at 1%.
In Canada, economic growth is expected to be choppy.
But if things are rosier than it was thought they might be, why does this guy look so worried?
We're on track.
Maybe it's other economic indicators that are still signaling challenging times. While Ottawa likes to brag it's finally bringing its record annual deficits down, if you add up what both federal and provincial governments owe, it's more than $1 trillion of debt they're leaving for the next generation. So where are we really? And how does it and should it affect your household? Good questions. Time for some answers. All right, what's the bottom line? Time to panic or relax? Patty?
Oh, it's not time to panic, Peter, not at all. But it is time to be vigilant. And that's because it is fall and there's change in the air. And that change is that interest rates are rising. I think Canadians have become so accustomed to the past few years of ultra low interest rates. But the party is over. The punch bowl is about to be taken away. Rates are rising. And I think they have a lot further to go.
And I want to talk about interest rates in a moment. But on the panic, relax.
Likewise, no panic, no party either. We're kind of halfway through what I suspect will be a decade-long funk. Next week, Peter, is the 5th anniversary of the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which was kind of the cannon shot that signaled the global crisis. And we're still recovering, and I think we're going to take another 5 years at least to really get over what happened. All
right, let me rephrase it a touch then. Worried or confident? Preet.
Neither. Cautiously optimistic, but when I take a step back and I look at the Bank of Canada 1% interest rate, it's extreme stimulus. You don't have extreme stimulus if everything is hunky-dory. So not extremely confident, but not panicked either.
Amanda.
Still cause for worry, as far as I'm concerned, for two reasons in Canada. It's not as bad as it might seem. The media reports often reflect what's happening in America, which is much more dramatic than what's going on here. But we don't have the jobs recovery that we should have. We don't have the quality of jobs we should have. And more important, I'm watching business spending, business investment. It's not there. Businesses aren't confident. And when they don't spend and invest, we don't grow the economy. So until we see that, I remain worried.
Let me break it down into a number of the different categories, some of the major indicators. You mentioned interest rates, Patty, so let's start there because, you know, you're right, interest rates have been going up for consumers at banks, but as we mentioned in the setup, the Bank of Canada rate seems to be like frozen at 1% for quite some time now. Why the disconnect between those two?
It has been frozen for 3 years, Peter, which is the longest period of low interest rates since the 1950s. But the Bank of Canada only has control over that rate. It's the cost of overnight money. But there's something called a yield curve, and it starts at the overnight money. That's the anchor. And then interest rates go out from there. The cost of rates rises for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. So where rates are rising right now is not the overnight rate, but 5-year rates, 10-year rates. Those are rising. But perversely, that's a good thing because part of the reason they're rising is because the economy is actually a lot better than it has been.
Where are you on this, Preet?
Yeah, I mean, the Bank of Canada can control the short-term rates, but at the longer end with fixed-rate mortgages, which are tied to the longer end of the spectrum, the banks borrow from the bond market, and the bond market is saying we think interest rates will go up in the future, so if the cost for banks to fund those mortgages is higher, guess what? The cost for you to fund your mortgage is going to be higher because they pass the cost along.
Now, the great thing about interest rates going up is it must mean they're going to pay us more for the money we have in the bank, right?
This is the problem with what's going on right now. I mean, as Patty says, the low end, where the Bank of Canada sets rates, is how a lot of our rates are determined. So your line of credit will be tied to that, which is good news, but your savings rate is also tied to that. And a lot of the bonds that people rely on, the short-term government bonds, will stay at non-existent returns. It's further out in the market where the market is saying, what's going to happen? Might there be inflation? Will there be growth? That's where you start to see rates tick up. So your mortgage gets more expensive and you're not making any more on your savings account. That's kind of painful.
So for consumers, they would look at 5-year GICs because that's on the further end of the spectrum. You might see an increased rates there before you see it on high interest savings accounts.
Right.
All right, let's move to housing. It was kind of unfair to you guys, including all your thoughts about the housing bubbles in that little pack. 'Cause I don't think any of you were wrong. But it has been one of these stories that we've all kind of been confused about because everybody expected a burst on the bubble, and it didn't happen. Preet, why?
Well, I can tell you that my girlfriend and I sold our house and we're renting now. But it wasn't because we're trying to time the market. It was opportunistic because my girlfriend took a job on the other side of the city. We didn't know exactly where we were going to put down roots, so we weren't ready to make a long-term decision. But I think for the rest of the Canadians out there looking at what's going on with housing, you had, interest rates are starting to creep up. So people are having those 90-day, 120-day locks. They're trying to lock those in before interest rates go up. Then you had buyers who were frozen out of the market last year because of tightening. They've had another year to save up. And so that's why you've seen what I think is a short-term blip for housing prices.
It still doesn't seem to make sense, though.
Yeah, the danger here is, and I've been a business journalist for 20 plus years, in 2007, when the U.S. housing market...
You started when you were 7?
Right? It's crazy. In 2007, when the U.S. housing market was going bananas, I talked to person after person, and you would say, it must need to correct. It can't continue to go up. And they would say, no, 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 it's different this time. Those are dangerous words. It's not ever different. It will correct. The question is, when does it correct? We're due for one. We're long overdue. It doesn't have to be 15, 20, 30%, but some kind of correction is coming our way, 5 or 10%. It's inevitable.
And where the housing market really affects the real economy, Peter, is on the construction side. We're obviously all watching prices and resale values, but it is in terms of building new condos and new homes where it really adds to our employment, our income, our GDP. And we are seeing some signs of a slowdown on housing starts, a definite slowdown in residential construction employment. So those are more signs, I think, that what you are seeing is people locking in the low rates while they can and getting ready for what hopefully will be a soft landing in the sector.
I think the jury's still out on this one, Peter. I think earlier on at one of the panels, I said there was going to be a soft landing, a hard landing, or no landing. And the numbers for July and August, to me, look like no landing because we had a huge increase in sales. And if the government is looking at that, there's probably cause for concern. So I don't think we've answered the question of whether the house prices are going to correct significantly or not.
Well, people love talking about house prices.
We're doubling down on being wrong. You can say
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. That was the point.
Not me. Yeah. Or just not being right yet.
Yeah. But eventually, you got to be right at some point, right? Now, let's move it to job creation, because this is a puzzle, Jim, watching these numbers, because one month they're, the numbers are up, next month they're down, and there does not appear to be a consistency here. What's happening?
Economists have learned to be very, very skeptical of those month-to-month jumps, and they do seem to be more volatile than ever before. This month seemed to be a good number. Last month was a horrible number, and it doesn't really seem to jive with what we see around us in the economy every day. So there's probably some issues in terms of how the sample that's used to gather those estimates comes from. So economists very much look at a year-over-year trend or a longer-run picture. And on that basis, we're kind of stuck in the mud in this so-called recovery, which again began back in 2009, in theory, when we hit bottom and started to climb back. We had a year and a half of decent job growth. Since that point, the new jobs have really barely kept pace with population growth, and that's not enough to really repair the labor market. Then there's also the issue of the quality of jobs. We're seeing more and more precarious work, contract work, temporary jobs, and that doesn't allow families to have the confidence to make major purchases. So the longer run trend in the job market has really been treading water at best.
Yeah, and I think we've identified this issue of youth unemployment, but again, youth unemployment is incredibly high, poor quality of jobs, again, and I read this statistic, it was really interesting and scary. For every decrease of $5,000 in starting income, it translates into $600,000 in less career earnings. So if students are starting, they've graduated, and they've got lower job prospects, their lifetime earnings are going to be quite a bit less by $600,000 per $5,000. This is very scary.
People have asked me, grandmothers have come up to me and said, what do I tell my grandkids about jobs? And what I say is, tell them to do what your grandmother did. Get a job. Get any job you can. Get whatever experience you can. Maybe it's contract work, maybe it's part-time work. It's a very different market, but that's the reality. And I think we need a different mindset. There was a whole generation or two of us who were just able to get the jobs we had trained for and get on the escalator of success and ride it up. That's over. It's a whole new era.
You know, Jim, you mentioned earlier about how we're kind of halfway through, and a lot of people are suggesting it's a 10-year bad times or tough times from 2008 to 2018. But we're halfway through, and there is this sense in some areas, especially in North America, that a recovery is happening, it's beginning to happen. So how should we describe where we are right now in our economy?
Well, we're waiting for that recovery. We sure are, but we don't yet have the symptoms of a true recovery. If we look back in history at how the Canadian economy or other economies recovered from recessions, we came out of it a lot faster. We generated some self-sustaining momentum. You got a kind of virtuous circle going where more people had jobs, they were confident, they spent money, and that in turn created more jobs. You had businesses investing rapidly. Amanda mentioned that point earlier, and they are not doing that in Canada. In fact, the second quarter GDP numbers on business investment were terrible. So we don't have those ingredients yet. And the problem is everybody's waiting for the momentum to start, but somebody has to start the momentum.
I think it has started, though.
Until we get enough of that happening, everyone is going to kind of sit on their hands.
Okay, Patty's a little more optimistic.
Yeah, I think we really turned an important corner here. It has been 5 years. Stephen Poloz calls this the post-war reconstruction
new governor
period.
of the bank.
Right, the new governor, which I love that analogy. But it's been 5 years. And the reason why interest rates are rising is because the U.S. Federal Reserve is going to be the first bank that begins to withdraw some of that incredible amount of stimulus that's in the system. So again, this is a good sign. They wouldn't be withdrawing that stimulus if prospects were all that bad. So I'm actually quite optimistic.
After our bank, of course, because Canada is one of the places that did the stimulus and has already withdrawn it and is now waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. I do think that the biggest thing I'm waiting for is to see business confidence return. And it may be that Canadian businesses are very mindful of what's happening in America. It still seems as though it's a bit of a teeter-totter. You can't quite trust the recovery. Maybe it's that they're worried about Europe, but business confidence is essential. And if there's anything government can do now, it would be to help instill that. You saw the move on the employment insurance just this week. Things like that might help is what government needs to do.
They're still sitting on piles of cash.
Record levels of cash. And you can't force a business to invest. They do it when they feel ready and confident.
Right.
It's a problem. Until they do, we won't get normal growth.
Because this is not a normal recovery. Sorry, Peter, if we look at the amount of stimulus that we've pumped into the world economies, that's like pumping all that dope into a pro athlete. We should be winning gold medals right, left, and center, but instead we're kind of stumbling along. And I think that's what's really confusing for a lot of Canadians is we've heard about all the stimulus. Where's the growth? Where's the jobs? Yeah. It is different
Where's
this time.
Lance Armstrong?
The new head of Athletics Canada here, Patty Groff. Preet, where are you on this?
Well, you know, maybe businesses are looking at numbers a little bit differently. Maybe they see the headline unemployment rate of 7.1 and they say, you know what, that's not the true unemployment rate. When you factor in all the people who have dropped out of showing up in those numbers, that's closer to what, 12, 13%? Yeah. So maybe they're saying, who's going to buy all our products? We're not ready to invest yet.
We're going to take our little break here, but we'll be back in a moment with a question about the legacy we're leaving for our children. It's not pretty. At least they think it isn't. And welcome back to The Bottom Line. Patty, Jim, Preet, and Amanda are all at the table tonight. Let me show you one survey result on the economy that I find quite startling. I'm sure you will as well. Only 14% of Canadians believe their children will have a better life than they did. This comes from Ecos Research. What's the fundamental reason that we're seeing that kind of number? You wrote about this in your book, still on the bestseller list.
One of the reasons that I wrote the book was this very fact, which is we actually are poised to be the first generation in this nation's history that may leave our kids worse off than we were. It's a reverse of what usually happens. Wealth is the legacy that you leave, more prosperity. And the reason is a horribly boring sounding one, but it's our productivity. It's that we, for some reason in this country, whether it's businesses or individuals, aren't making the most of the resources we have at our disposal. And until we figure out why and make the most of it, we leave billions of dollars on the table and we leave our children at risk.
Patty?
Maybe that stat is because the children are on the couch at home, right? But I think that in terms of
watching the bottom line
and getting depressed.
But if we do look at young people today, they do face challenges that we didn't. They face things like massive student debt, unaffordable housing. They've got boomers who are hanging on to their jobs, so they're not being able to be promoted and moving along. They've got all these factors. They've got unpaid internships. They've got temporary work. Put that all together, and I can see why people are gloomy about the prospects ahead.
Jim?
Well, the reason people feel that way is because it is true. I mean, it's already true. Real wages in Canada today for hourly workers are no higher than they were in 1980 after adjusting for inflation. How do you explain that? Look at all the technology. I mean, our productivity growth hasn't been great, but it's been positive. So we should still be better off than we were in 1980. Same goes for real median family incomes. So most Canadians actually aren't getting a share of the limited productivity growth that we're achieving. I think the most infuriating part of it for young people must be that they know it doesn't have to be that way. We actually are capable as a society of producing more than we ever have before. And all of the ideology about scarcity and having to tighten our belts fundamentally isn't economically justified if we could put people to work like we need to.
Preet?
I think because times are tough, and I think this is a new reality, maybe we should toughen up our kids a little bit more. I read an article today on the Wall Street Journal that apparently millennials are taking their parents in for job interviews to help them with the process. No. I mean, this is taking helicoptering parenting to an all-new level.
This is the guy who has no kids, okay?
Good point. I would do that.
Just carry on there, Preet.
All right.
So you're in those shoes.
To wrap things up here tonight, it's tip time. So I want your best economic tip for these kind of times. Patty?
My best tip is if you're going to buy that house and contribute to the overvaluation, buy or get a fixed rate mortgage. Now is the time to switch from variable to fixed, because 5 years from now, rates are going to be a lot higher.
Jim?
You can do your best to protect yourself as an individual in an economy that isn't creating the good jobs. You know, be prudent with your finances and get skills, etc. But that won't solve the problem for all of us. We've got to address as a society why we aren't producing good jobs and what we need to do it. And then while you're at it, you can join a union, like Unifor. That'll help.
You always manage to get that.
Took me almost a whole show this time to do it.
Yeah, that's right. Preet?
I'm a broken record. You can control what you can control. You got to save yourself, and that means paying down debt and maybe being a little bit more frugal. That might be bad for the economy, but I'm sure not everyone is taking this advice. So if things do go south, protect yourself.
I was going to say something else, but I'm going to say, don't be defeatist. Don't say it's all gloomy, my kids are doomed, the economy's not going anywhere. Remember that we actually can make something out of nothing. Economies are organic, and we are capable of great things. So I would say, let's make great things happen. And whether that's an individual story or a collective one, it doesn't matter. Let's actually be a little optimistic here.
Such an optimist.
Wow, get me some of that.
Come on.
And it's all in your book.
It's all in the book.
And it's all in Jim's book. And it's all in Preet's book. And Patty
I'm
is
working
thinking
on
about a book. I just got her on Twitter, so we're moving. All right, thanks to all of you, and thanks to you as well. We always like to hear your thoughts on our topics, and you can always reach us at cbcnews.ca/thenational.